What's going on, guys? Welcome to Rob's house. All right, so last week we left off installing our Bellinger exhaust system onto the Viper. Today we're going to be installing the second component that came in, and that is over here. It is a set of BC Racing coilovers. So one of the things that I don't like about this car ever since I got it is that it looks like a monster truck. There's a ton of wheel gap. I showed in the video when we actually got the Viper and we took delivery of the Viper what it looked like, just, you know, what the stance looked like and stuff, and it's just too high. The front, I mean, the front's high, it's not horrible. The back is pretty bad. And the only way that we can lower it is we need some adjustable coilovers. The factory suspension is actually a coilover style suspension, but it's not adjustable at all. So I got these BC Racing custom coilovers. It took a while. There were, you know, everything's delayed right now. Same thing with the exhaust. It just took months for them to get materials so that they could actually build the components and send them out. Anyway, they are here. I'm going to get started and I'll kind of walk you guys through the process. It looks pretty straightforward. I was looking around online last night and it looks like it should be a pretty easy swap. It's pretty much just an unbolt, kind of pull it out type deal. Because the factory suspension is a coilover style suspension, these are direct bolt-on replacements. I don't need a spring compressor because the spring is not separate. I should be able to just remove this factory suspension, you know, on each corner of the car, just all in one piece, and replace it with our BC setup. So let's get these coilovers unboxed and then we'll get started. All right, guys, check them out. These are our coilovers. This is a rear style for the Viper. They are preloaded from the factory. I think I'm gonna actually install them at the height that BC has them. It should drop, I think like an inch in the front, inch and a half in the rear just by installing them as is, but they are adjustable so we can adjust the ride height. They do have adjustable dampening as well. So up here we have our harder or soft, it says H and S, so it tells you which way to turn them, how many, and they click. So you have to make sure, obviously, if you do adjust the dampening on one of them, that you have to make sure that you do an even number of clicks, right? So for both sides. So that's one type. Oh yeah, they are marked. I didn't even realize. Yeah, so this is I was right. The other one was a rear and this is a front. All that said, I did realize I totally forgot that this car had this front lip. It really acts more like a ground effects kind of thing. It doesn't really stick out like your typical front lip would. And the problem with that is it hangs really low. So at stock ride height, it's pretty close to the ground. It's probably as low as the Corvette. Might even be a little lower than the Corvette. So I'm gonna actually just take that off. I do want to do, spoiler alert, I want to do some ACR style aero on this car. So I want to do like a proper front splitter with like rods and stuff, but one that doesn't hang low but actually kind of comes out and gives us like some downforce, right? So whereas the one that's on here right now is kind of just for looks, and same thing with like these side skirt extensions. All this stuff is from Autoform. It's nice quality. It's just that when I lower this now, that front lip is going to be like on the ground, so I just have to take it off. It's just got a series of bolts under it, super easy to take off, so I'm going to take that off first and then we'll get started on the coilovers. All right, guys, I got that front lip off. As you can see here, there were just a ton of bolts, and a couple of them had backing nuts, like the one right here and stuff. So they were a little tricky to get out. I didn't want to have to pull the whole front bumper off because there was only a few of those. So what I did instead was I took sort of all the other bolts out. That allowed me to put enough weight on a couple of the other ones that they didn't get stuck and they came out. And then there's some access ports in here in the fender liner. I don't know if you could see. There you go. In the fender liner, and I just I took the wheels off, took those out, and then I was able to get my hands in there and get at the backing nuts so that I could actually remove the remainder of the screws. So we got that lip out. That's off now. Now let's get started on the suspension. Since I had to take the front wheels off to get to those access ports, we're gonna start with the fronts. Let's get started. All right, guys, I got one of the fronts done. It's a little tricky. There's two things that are tricky about this. So we have the coilover installed. Here's the bottom mount. Let me turn my light on here so you can see. We've got a bottom mount and then the top mount. And the thing that's tricky about it is, first of all, removing the old one because it's so tall compared to the new one. You unbolt the top, let the suspension drop all the way down. And then the way that I found to get it out is pull it forward and jam it up as much as you, once you have both mounts off, jam it up as much as you can to swing the back out. Little tricky, little annoying, but I got it out. There's a lot more room, obviously, to install the coilover. Now, the other thing that's tricky is this mount is very much made to fit. It's pretty hard to wedge this guy into place. I tried doing it by hand a bunch of times. This also swivels, so that wasn't great. So the way that I found to do it, basically like lined it up and used my jack to start bringing the suspension up, lined these guys up, and then used the jack to actually wedge it in place because it was too tight to do it by hand. Torque specs for front and rear. All of the mounting bolts for the suspension are 100 pound-feet. So make sure that you have a big torque wrench, like I have this massive one. But it's hard because you have to hold the locking nut anyway. So you have an 18mm bolt and a 21mm locking nut. I actually tweaked my back doing it because you're doing that twisting motion and you have to put a lot of torque on it. I'm gonna get the other side done and then we'll move over to the rear and I'll show you what we're working with there. The setup's slightly different, but overall, looks like it's gonna be a pretty easy install. All right, guys, I went ahead and got started on the rear. There's a little bit of a trick. So by the way, my other front was really stuck. Like the bolts were really stuck. So penetrating lube and I kind of mangled them getting out. But anyway, I got this out of the rear. The way to lift the shock out of the rear, because the half shaft is in the way, this little squishy piece of rubber, if you get the top aligned with this, push all the way up on it, and you'll be able to get the bottom free. You can get the bottom free of the A-arm. Once that's free, it'll drop down kind of where like this part's resting on the half shaft, and then you can pull this side more toward you and get it out. So anyway, out with the old, in with the new. I will time lapse. This is the third corner. I still have one more corner to do, so I'm gonna time lapse that one, and then we'll come back and we'll see what the ride height looks like. All right, guys, I finished the last side. Everything's in. We're gonna drop the car back onto the ground after I put the fender liner and the wheel back on. One thing that I did want to note is I think I know why the bolt got stuck on the front passenger side, because my rear driver's side got stuck in a similar manner. As soon as I got that bolt loose, the shock went like up and wedged the bolt into place, and I think that's because I did this one side at a time. And I think because the opposite side already had the coilover installed, which is of course much stiffer and is just shorter in general, I think the problem is that the sway bar is actually on the opposite side being pulled up on. And what that translates to is both sides are getting tugged up because of that sway bar. So there's two ways to get around this. One, you can remove the sway bar, or less annoying, you can just remove both sides first and then install them one at a time, because installation's fine. Once I had it out, it's really easy to put the new one in, use the jack to get it into place, and torque it down. The problem was removing the second side, whether that be the front or the rear, and I think that's because of the sway bar. So the easiest way to do it is to just do, remove both fronts and then install both fronts, and then remove both rears and install both rears, instead of doing remove one, install one, remove one, install one, the way I did it. But I didn't know that that was gonna happen. I'm also like, I haven't messed with suspension that much outside of like, I swapped a leaf spring on the Corvette, and I've swapped shocks on the Mustang, but I don't know, I didn't have problems like that on the Mustang. So, and it has a sway bar. But anyway, this one's pretty, I guess it's just a really beefy sway bar. And once you jack the opposite side up into place and lock that coilover in, the opposite side won't want to go in. So I overcame that obstacle. Let me get the car together and we'll put it on the ground and we'll see how she looks. Ladies and gentlemen, now she looks like a Viper. Way, 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 way better. I can barely get I can get 2 fingers in the front and 2 fingers in the rear, actually. Now that I'm feeling it there. Yep, pretty much dead even, front and rear. So if you remember before, we were getting more than 4 fingers in the back and just about 4 fingers in the front. So I mean, it was sitting a lot higher than this. I'd say, honestly, I think just with the factory settings on the BC coilovers, I'd say we got about 1.5 inch drop in the front and 2 inches in the rear. I could go lower than this, but I'm gonna drive it as is, see how it feels. I mean, it's pretty low. You gotta figure, like, the wheel gaps on this car are kind of like the Corvette, where they're pretty deep into the body. It's not like the Mustang, where the Mustang looks slammed, but it's really not. Just because it has like literally no wheel gap at all. But, if you kind of look at the Corvette's kind of the same way. I can still get 2 fingers, barely, but I can barely get 2 fingers in there. And I mean, the car is pretty low. So, as you can see now, that front lip would not have fit on there at all. But I think the car looks a lot better now. Should drive a lot better with these coilovers. So I'll update you in a later video on how she does on the road. But for tonight, that's gonna wrap it up. I'm gonna clean up my mess of a garage and go take a shower because I'm super sweaty and super gross. As usual, I hope this video is helpful. I hope this video is entertaining, and I'll see you guys next time.